So far, they're not criticizing the government, but if we look ahead, I think the Israelis will not forgive Netanyahu for what's going on, and he can say goodbye to his career. Israelis kind of say, so our prime minister is a liar, and he was caught many times lying, and he's corrupt, but whatever, he even has some autocratic traits, just like Putin, but he can't realize them anyway, but he has them. So all this can be forgiven, because he can guarantee security for us, but it turns out that he cannot guarantee even security. Yes, they opened the Pandora box, and Putin demonstrated the whole world that the war and military force is an effective political instrument, no matter what the outcomes of it could be. Hello, dear friends. This is Discussion Club channel, radio's podcast. I am Arkady Inkovsky. We have two experts. They answer my questions and they express their ideas on the topics that they think are the most important today. This is how I decided to arrange our podcast today. I would like Valeriy Solovey and Abbas Galliamov to single out those events that are most important today and could be continued in the future. Welcome. Hello, dear friends and viewers. My plan was suddenly corrected right now, and we are recording our podcast today on the 7th of October, 6 p.m. Moscow time. Our audience asked me to say what the time is, so we just got the news from Israel that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, declared a war in Israel, and since Abbas Galliamov is in Israel right now, so I would like to ask him to start. Hello, everyone. Hello, Arkady. Yes, right. Today in the morning, there was a massive attack on the south and center of Israel from the Gaza Strip. It was more intensive than it usually happened before. But actually, it's quite a regular thing in this region, and itself it wouldn't be a sensation, but what made it a sensation, that this attack was accompanied with the invasion of small terrorist groups to the territory of Israel. And that hasn't happened for decades. And all this is happening at the time when we have an anniversary of the Judgment Day War. It was one of the biggest wars of Israel, and within few days Israel was on the brink of survival. That's why this invasion brought back all those memories of the Judgment Day War. And people compare this invasion with that war quite often today. So today we're not saying that Israel is on the brink of survival, and the forces that are involved are absolutely incomparable. Back then, the army of the enemy was almost 1 million troops. It was Syria and Egypt, and military corps of almost all Islamic states, including Iraq. And right now, the number of troops, militants that invaded Israel, there are hundreds of them, and they managed to take over a few checkpoints. You know why they compare this two events? Because back then Israel was caught off guard, and today the same. And of course such things leave people flabbergasted, and the war, that war 50 years ago, was ended with the victory of Israel, but first few days it was quite difficult. And the war ended with the resignation of Golda Meir government, and her political career was over, and the defense minister of that time also resigned. And now I think if we look ahead, and if we can exclude the military factor from it, because I'm not a military expert, I'm more like a political expert, dozens or hundreds of militants, they don't present existential threat for the country, but it will shake the political system. Right now everybody is united, and so far there is no criticism of the government in the public space, and opposition supports the government. They cancelled all the protests, though those protests lasted for almost 6 months. And going forward, we may say that Israelis will not forgive Netanyahu for what's going on, and he may say goodbye to his career. Of course, after the victory, they will blame Netanyahu for what happened. For many years, his main political point was the matter of security. Israelis kind of say, so our prime minister is a liar, and he was caught many times lying, and he's corrupt. Well, what can we do? He has this autocratic traits, just like Putin, but he can't realize them here, yet he has them. So all this can be forgiven, because at least he guarantees security for us. But it turns out that he can't guarantee security at all. So in such a way, he didn't live up to his promises, and he wouldn't be able to cover it. I wouldn't say anything like that if I was interviewed by an Israeli channel, but since we're talking to our Russian audience, so I can make some political conclusions, but my view is quite subjective. And right now Israelis are united, and all the internal tensions are put off. In the south of Gaza there are military actions. Airstrikes are launched on the Gaza Strip with bombs and missiles. They say these are surgical strikes, and it seems that Israel is preparing a land operation. At least the Security Council approved of it, and now the decision is in the government's hands. Right now we witness skirmishes in that area. The problem is exacerbated because Hamas managed to take many hostages, and that's why for Israel defense forces it's very difficult to fully deploy. That's why everything is moving pretty slowly. This is what's going on. Abbas, I have one question. There is a general sense that it will take long. It's not like few days operation and the end will be soon. So what do you think? I mentioned a land operation, because if Israel doesn't do it and will only push Hamas out of Israel to Gaza, and then will do a massive bombing of the region, then it won't take long. But if after that Israel decides to do a land operation, it will take long and will be quite bloody, and there are certain signs that it may happen because the Security Council already approved of it. The thing is that at some point, as a gesture of goodwill, Israel left Gaza. It gave the people of Gaza the right of self-governance. They elected Hamas Hamas waged a war. Well, it seems that you people can't self-govern. Then we need to return to the regime of occupation that you didn't like so much. You didn't manage to use your voting rights. So this logic is possible. I haven't heard it yet. But it's quite possible. And I think as part of this logic, there can be a full-scale occupation of the region. For decades, the Gaza Strip was under occupation of Israel. You mean Golan Heights too, right? Well, Golan Heights, this is the north. It's closer to Syria's border, and Syria has its own issues. That's why it is not as tense, but if we take it to the left, the border of Lebanon, Hezbollah is there, and now they're demonstrating their power. And on the border there are many military groups, and they're maneuvering on the border openly, kind of teasing Israel. Theoretically, they may attack too, and it's quite possible. But so far there was no shooting, and so far Hezbollah only verbally supports Hamas. Thank you, Abbas. Israel is a permanently fighting country, and this word sudden attack, it's quite surprising, especially for Netanyahu. Let me clarify one thing. In Israel we have now the government of right radicals. I think it's 1.5 years, I think they're in power, and all this time this government was escalating tensions. Part of the ministers in Netanyahu government, they were openly provoking the situation, and Netanyahu allowed it to happen. And the fact that they were not ready for it, this is really unbelievable. Because when you're peaceful and when you're not ready, when something like that happens, then there is some logic. But if you're escalating the conflict and you're not ready, this is very strange. So that's why my forecast is that the government may not get through this. I would like to ask Valeriy to comment a bit broader, and maybe you, Abbas, may add something to it. Valeriy, today in the morning, in the social media, I expressed perhaps not an original thought that everything that's going on in the world is a division, and many of medium-sized dictators and politicians of kind of secondary tier country, they express their ambitions, and we saw the events between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So all those conflicts that were put off in the time when Putin waged the war, so all those conflicts begin to resume. So what do you think? This event kind of adds to the picture. There could have been some provocation on the side of Netanyahu government, but actually the backdrop against which all this happening, some dictators arise and some pains come back. Would you agree with that? Yes, I do agree, and I said it many times. At the beginning of Russo-Ukrainian confrontation, actually, of course, people call it differently, but here, myself, who's in Russia now, we have to select words. Yes, they opened the Pandora box, and Putin proved the whole world and demonstrated it that a war and the military force is still a very effective political tool. And I would like to underline it, no matter what the outcomes of it could be, because a negative experience is also an experience. So the Chinese noticed that, and they began escalating in Taiwan. Right now it kind of stopped, but relatively recently we discussed prospects of Chinese attacking Taiwan. So back then they were hypothetical. Today it is kind of more possible. And this is a direct result of Putin's war. There is an example, and everybody in the world looks at it and says, so yes, military force is an effective tool. In some cases, capabilities to resist this force are quite limited. And what all the Western countries do, they are distracted by the Russo-Ukrainian confrontation. Azerbaijan leaders, they have an old conflict with Armenia, and they just realize it is a unique situation for them to settle their territorial argument. And why it's unique? Because Russia lost its role of a policeman in the post-Soviet territory in the South Caucasus, so now Turkey is taking over. And these military events in Israel that we started our discussion with, Abbas was quite succinct describing what's happening, and actually that's how the picture should be presented, not focusing on details but kind of giving a broader picture. And it's very important for the Russian audience, but for Israelis I'm sure that details are very important because they're in the center of it. Of course there are many speculations, and I think you, Arkady, saw that and Abbas saw that, how Russia is connected to this confrontation. I mean Hamas attack on Israel. I don't want to speculate because I don't have proven facts. I just have some assumptions. We know that Iran is connected to it. We have no doubt about that. Theoretically speaking, though I said that I'll try to avoid speculations, and this is a speculation, I wouldn't exclude a possibility that Russia could have used a false flag operation. Directly, Russia is not interested in participating in any conflict with Israel and provoke suspicions. And we know why. Israel, generally speaking, does not support Ukraine in the confrontation. Israel does not impede shipments of some sensitive equipment to Russia, not directly, but it's done through the third countries. Besides, there is an aspect that's important for the Russian leadership, for Putin particularly. I said several times that in the spring of this year, Israeli doctors refused to treat Putin anymore. Putin took it really hard, and Israeli doctors said that now everything is in God's hand. I think we may not see any intention in this attack on the 7th of October, which is Putin's birthday, but which is not actually his birthday. This date in his official bio is not the right date. Yes, they're celebrating this birthday, but I can tell you confidently this is the last birthday of Putin. I said it many times, so we catch you on that. So yes, please. This fall, Putin will not survive. Looking at what's going on, we may make some assumptions, and they can be speculative. I don't have precise information. Though, but what we can say that the example of Russia was quite viral. We can see how armies of the whole world are re-equipped, and we will see the increase of military conflicts. One more time, war is a tool of politics. In some way, this is we can thank Putin for that. Yes, you're right. And in my podcasts, I many times use this term, a new Cold War that is taking over the world. And all these events, like we witnessed today in the Middle East, they're similar to that. Abbas, would you like to add to it something? Strictly speaking, your logic is correct, and I wouldn't argue with that. But just to avoid some misunderstandings, and Valeriy didn't mention this, this is what I want to say. Putin helped create a context in which evil becomes more common, the war is more regular, kind of more legitimate, kind of people say. So if they have it in Europe, why can't we do that? In this sense, Putin is a provocator. But in general, this political conflict existed before Putin and will exist after him, especially if Putin is not going to stay around for longer. So, let me say this, that this war, this conflict has its own dynamics, and it has to do with Putin, not directly and minimally. I think Iran got a nod from Putin. Kind of Putin said, I wouldn't object if you begin the attack. In other words, Iran initiated the attack. It's not Putin who came to Iran and said to them that, attack Israel. No, it wasn't like this. General context, he nodded to Iran. The confrontation between Israel and Palestine was growing, and because of the Israeli radicals, and we have to look for a trigger locally, and we shouldn't blame Putin for that. And as you know, I'm not a big fan of him. Yes, triggers, they work differently in different situations, and yes, and we can agree on that. Dear viewers, dear friends, we talk mainly about internal policies, about the future on our podcast, and our podcast radios was broadcast in Japan, Osaka television, daily news program, and there are 200,000 watching us, and in Japan there is quite a big audience too, and I hope you also appreciate our work with likes and subscription, and I would like to remind you that, and thank you for that. So let's move to the events of the domestic policy, and I asked Abbas and Valeriy to single out the most important events, recent events. Quite often what happens, people discuss events, and those events are kind of glaring and maybe are not that influential, and there's some other events that are kind of behind the closed doors, and experts can actually identify them and can talk about them. And I would like to start with Abbas. So what would you single out, and why it's important given what's going on? What I noticed, there are several stories that have to do with Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya. He started playing such a destructive role in the Russian policy over the last few days. It's insane what's happening. Look what happened. A map fell off my wall. It's a map of Manhattan. It is so surprising what you say. Yes, please continue. This whole story with beating, the one that they posted on the internet, all of a sudden it was supported by Putin, and then Ministry of Culture of Russia announced that capital of Chechnya will be the cultural capital of Russia, and Kadyrov's daughter was appointed a vice prime minister, and his 15-year-old son has beaten an unarmed boy, and this was officially supported in Russia. And it seemed that finally Kadyrov found a proper opponent for himself, and this is Russian public opinion. So he had issues with the Ukrainian military forces, he couldn't fight with them, and then he tried to have some fights with Prigozhin, and he wanted to have a meeting with him or something and wrestle with him, and then he was pushed away. And then the troops of Kadyrov kind of drove to Rostov, to the mutiny place, Prigozhin's mutiny place, and they kind of got lost on the way. So it seems that Kadyrov kind of attacks someone, gets hit in the nose, kind of crawls away, and now finally he found Russian public opinion that he can break. And now what he does, he says, like, I can do everything unpunished. So we do this, and Putin receives us. Because every step that we discuss here today, so beating, his meeting with Putin, a mosque that they're going to build in Moscow that he's going to fund, his daughter is the vice prime minister, cultural capital of Russia, the capital of Chechnya. Public opinion takes that shockingly. And the public opinion is through the whole spectrum, from those crazy patriots to the liberals, and in other words, these groups of people that can't agree on anything. But on the matter of what Kadyrov is doing, they are united. They're very negative to what he does. And it looks like Kadyrov enjoys that, provoking the public opinion like that, and he keeps escalating. And why it's so funny to me, because in such a way he's trying to kind of restore his position in Chechnya. Everybody now sees that Kadyrov is still in the game and he is not as sick as people say. Before he was doing whatever he wanted, and now he's doing the same. But it's counterproductive for Putin. Because when he indignates the Putin's electorate base, all those Z patriots, I don't think that's Putin's goal. But by supporting Kadyrov, he makes those people indignant. His yesterday's supporters, they turn away from him because they're tired of the war. And it seems like the war will be lost, and people don't like repressions in the country. And there's a problem with the public opinion. And now Putin takes side of Chechens in this open conflict between the Russians and Chechens. As soon as there is ethnicity in the conflict involved, so for people it looks like this. So a Russian boy was given away to Chechens. Yes, he's stupid, fine, but he's not a pedophile. This boy was not a killer, was not a traitor. And actually, he's a patriot of the country, also Z patriot. Yes, a fool, should be reprimanded, or should be brought to court, but not to be beaten in front of a camera publicly and posted like this. So it looks for the public like this. So the Russian boy was given to Chechens, and those Chechens are mocking at him. And Putin looks like president of Chechens, not like a Russian president. And why does Putin do this? It's a big question.
там все настолько плохо, то есть Путин просто получил информацию о том, что его там чеченские элиты, условно говоря, готовы хоть завтра начать.
And it's so bad with Kadyrov because Putin probably got this message that elites in Chechnya are trying to dethrone Kadyrov, and he's trying to strengthen Kadyrov's position in Chechnya. And Putin does everything to support Kadyrov so that he wouldn't be removed. Or Putin kind of lost connection with the earth, meaning he's kind of breaking bad. Emotions are dominating. And unconsciously, Putin is trying to show his power. It's like, whatever I want to do, I will do, and I don't care about it. So you want to get the head of Kadyrov, so I'm not going to give it to you on the platter. Or maybe Putin cannot resist it anymore. No, Arkady. See, if he couldn't resist that, he wouldn't be showing up like this. He didn't have to receive Ramzan Kadyrov like this publicly when the scandal is raging, and allow Kadyrov to build a mosque in Moscow. And I would say it's an unpopular move in the eyes of this audience of Russian patriots. And the Ministry of Culture was not supposed to announce Grozny, the capital of Chechnya, as a cultural capital of Russia. See, it's not his inability to resist what's going on. I think this is a demonstrative public support of Kadyrov, and obviously it works against Putin. By doing this, Putin shot in his own foot, and I'm trying to understand why he does that. Yes, it is important and quite noticeable, so I would like to move to Valeriy now. Maybe Valeriy will comment on the importance of this event and how he understands it, and then he will describe an event that he considers important. I agree with Abbas that this whole story with Kadyrov is in the focus of public attention, and it provokes strong emotions, and it seems that it demonstrates impunity and power of Kadyrov. But the fact is that this is a huge political mistake, and he will pay a lot for it. Because what happened, he actually united Russian patriots, and they're not such a significant power. He demonstrated Putin's weakness, and Putin doesn't care what happens to Kadyrov. And it wasn't Putin who was meeting Kadyrov, it was Putin's double. In his state, Putin can only dedicate half an hour to deal with things, and Kadyrov united all secret agencies against himself. And as soon as the leader goes, the law enforcement agencies will punish Kadyrov, and in the future it will be bad for Kadyrov. And as soon as the power will be in the hands of this group of security agencies, and this is a coalition that is headed by Patrushev, the Secretary of the Security Council, then they will probably shift their focus from Ukraine, and they know on whom. So it's quite a big story and potentially dangerous. And another event, this is the speech of Putin, but actually it was Putin's double, and double participated in Valdai forum. I'm not going to discuss the content of what he was saying. It doesn't mean anything. It's delirious. As Kadyrov challenges public opinion, and Kadyrov actually demonstrates the sick psyche of the leader. And Putin is challenging common sense. He says, we didn't start this war, but we'll finish it. Prigozhin exploded the plane that he was flying on, and many things like that. But these are the visible events. But the real content of the political process of the last 2 weeks and the last months, this is a strengthening of Patrushev group, and they're preparing to snatch the power, and it's happening quite successfully. And as I said, Putin is not going to survive this fall, and this event might happen even earlier, and at first they will use Putin's double, and while the double is running the country, they will be snatching the power, and this is what's important, and this is what's happening in Russia. People just can't see that, but on the surface you can see these loud events. As PR experts say, these are like protrusions. But we don't see what is the main nerve of the moment, and this will be hidden as long as possible. Those things, yes, they're bright, and we can mock at it. But all these surface events, they don't mean much. Just like what Kadyrov does, and I'm sure he enjoys it, but strategically it's a mistake. And he will learn it hard way. And many others will learn it too. And Putin doesn't care what Kadyrov does. Actually, Putin is busy with other things. He can't decide to make his last will, because as soon as he does, his days will be over. Maybe it's true, maybe not, but in any case, these days are not going to be long, and this is what's really happening, and that's the most important, the most interesting thing. Okay, Valeriy, now I would like to ask Abbas about Valdai forum. So what I learned from this forum, and I would like to ask a short question. This is what it seemed to me. On the one hand, when they spoke about the nuclear weapons, it was like another threat. But I sensed that the notes in it are different, the tone of it is different. Yes, we're like this, but we're not going to do this. I don't know who put it in Putin's mouth. Maybe this is Patrushev's doctrine that is changed. Is it so? Is there this kind of different shift in this nuclear matter? I think your assumption is fair. Of course, it was a way of psychological threat. He said, we're going to test this Burevestnik cruise missile. Well, try it, test it. Remember how Khrushchev used to say, so we're producing missiles like hot dogs. Remember in Soviet time what hot dogs were. And they say also we are ready to stop ratification of the treaty, nuclear treaty. Actually, they do that to show, yes, we still have the potential. We still have this gunpowder, but probably they won't burn this gunpowder, and maybe this gunpowder is pretty wet, and we don't know that, and how much of this gunpowder they have. Why he chose this time and place? Because there are many people come there, many experts come there, and they may communicate this position to their governments. That's one thing. And remember, these statements were made against the backdrop of the information that the Western media distributes, and this is the lack of ammunition in Ukraine. Americans have issues with the budget, with the national budget, which also limits their abilities. And for the Kremlin, it's a good chance to put some pressure, to say that we have this and that, but it's better to have a peace treaty. The only thing I disagree with Abbas, that Russia is losing in this confrontation. No, it's not even close to that. Right now, it is a strategic impasse, and it's obvious. Ukraine has nothing but positional successes. We are far from a quality turning point. we're in the same position as it was in June, July of this year. And this impasse will take longer because they have to prepare for the next few months, but we are not military experts. In this case, I refer to those assessments that I see in Western media and the most respected ones. And why I trust them? Because the West provides weapons to Ukraine and consults Ukraine on military matters. And I think their assessments could be more precise than Russian ones and Ukrainians. And I think from the point of view of the Kremlin, it's a good way to get to the peace treaty making track. And I think it's impossible because the West will continue supporting Ukraine, but the question is how long they're going to continue that. Now we can see a limit, and it has to do with internal political processes in the Western countries, particularly in the US. Yes, it's more like a foreign policy topic, and I would like to give the floor to Abbas. When experts disagree, this is just great for the host, and it's really pleasant. There is a chance for discussion, so that's why, please, if you need to reflect on this, please. When I say that Russia is losing and Putin's regime is losing, I don't mean that in the near future Ukrainians will defeat Russia and get back Crimea and all that. No. In itself, the lack of convincing victory, and when everything is hanging in the air like this, like Valeriy said, so this itself is a defeat. Putin created such high expectations. His image is so connected to the image of power, and the fact of a lack of convincing victory will turn into a defeat for him. As soon as that stand-still status will be obvious, and it will be clear that Russia didn't manage to defeat this awful Nazi regime, because this Nazi regime is about to join NATO and get support from the United States and all that. So, and launches strikes on our borders, and time is going. But this idea itself, that Putin didn't manage to defeat Ukraine, and when people begin to reflect on it, and while the war is going and all these things are just kind of in the mix and people are in a shock, but when it will be clear finally that everything is kind of hanging in the air, whether they sign the ceasefire treaty, and they may even have this Korean model, and after that the country will be returning to normal life. And what happens next? The standard of life will be falling, people will live in despair, economy will be falling, the quality of health care, education, and utility services, all of it will be falling, and people will be trying to reflect on it. It's like, why we're living so badly. And the farther they'll go from the hot point of this war, the more often they will get to an answer that this is Putin who is guilty for all this. So why we need this war? We're like hanging like this right now, like nobody's attacking us, there is no any threat. And they don't trust propaganda anymore. No matter what propaganda says right now, there's interpretation, let's put it this way, and there's a fact. And the fact is that for many years they promised us that our army is the strongest one, and in 3 days can destroy anybody, and we will be at the English Channel very quickly. So the expectations were not met. And gradually people will have this shift, and this process is happening. And when finally they see that there is no victory, it will continue even faster. Strategically, the regime lost because it was incapable to defeat Ukraine. And this is what I mean by strategic loss. The Valdai forum, the Valdai speech, I agree that it was an insane speech, delirious. But there was one idea that it was quite interesting for me. If it wasn't a war in Israel, and I probably put it on the first place, if it wasn't for the war in Israel, because he said very openly that the war is not a territorial war, it's not a matter of territory. He said it's more an ideological matter. So if it's not a territorial war, and he said we don't need territory, so if it's not a territorial war, so why they annexed these territories? And immediately you'll see inconsistency in that. And 3 days before that, and Medvedev is Putin's deputy in the Security Council, and Medvedev wrote in his Telegram channel that we will liberate all old Russian territories, and Russia will have more territories, and so that people saw that this is the most important idea, he put it in bold. So when you read Medvedev, you know this is a territorial conflict, and then 3 days later Putin comes out and says, no, it's not a territorial conflict. So I'm just trying to understand why he said that. And my conclusion is that probably he realizes that they'll have to leave those territories, and that's why in advance he decided to kind of devalue the value of it, so that those indignant Russian patriots wouldn't be as indignant, and he'll tell them that, you know, we told you that it's not a territorial conflict, so the thing that we lost those territories, it's not a big deal. And notice one thing. On those days when Putin was making his speech in Newsweek, and then Wall Street Journal wrote that the Russian Black Sea Fleet moved from Crimea to Novorossiysk and Chimchery in Abkhazia. Yeah, it was about Abkhazia, somewhere there. So it left Crimea. So do you understand how it looks? Ukrainian military forces gradually, slowly, but moving to Crimea, and they're taking back some towns. But the Russian military is leaving Crimea. This is how it looks. And Putin in this situation says, yeah, but this is not a territorial issue. This strategy is of the fox, like from the fable Fox and Grapes. It's like the grapes were sour and I didn't really want it after all. I think that was probably the most interesting part of his speech. Yes, thank you. Maybe there is another event that you would like to comment on. Or if not, then I will give the floor to Valeriy. Or maybe there is something in the news of opposition. Well, in the opposition camp, there's discussion. Okay. So if you have nothing to say, then this is what I noticed. Let me try this one. I know that Abbas will say that I'm an expert of domestic policy, but maybe he will be able to comment on this. So this is what I noticed. Alexei Arestovich, Ukrainian politician, was in the United States, and I think he made some very bright statements. He took part in interviews in some leading channels, and he called himself a politician in one of the interviews, and he was asked the question if he can be a president in Russia too, and he kind of made a joke of it. But I think what's important is the content of what he was talking about. He started this narrative that he was the only one who could afford it. This is a narrative to understand Russian politicians who want to help Ukraine win over Putin, and he was trying to kind of broaden this framework and to maybe gain some electoral votes, because quite possible in the next year there will be elections in Russia, in the US, and in Ukraine, and Americans are kind of pushing Zelensky to take part in these elections because they need to justify why they have Ukraine. They need to show their voters that in Ukraine there is a legitimate president, and that's why they want to support them. I think this is what's important. And Valeriy, could you say anything about this? Did you see any of the interviews with Arestovich, and can you comment on this? And then I ask Abbas too. Yes, actually, coincidentally, I met my friends and they listened to Alexei Arestovich quite attentively, even more attentively than I do. Yes, this is a new narrative for him. What's not new, this is an idea of his that he may become a Ukrainian president. Repeating this idea, it's quite possible that presidential elections are possible, and he might participate in this. Secondly, his latest interviews and statements, and his interview with Dmitry Gordon and Yulia Latinina, he's very critical towards Ukrainian authority and government. I don't know how it's taken in Ukraine. I don't have enough data to deeply analyze that, and I don't have sociological statistics. Many people say they quite negative to it, so when the country is at war, its government shouldn't be criticized like that because Russia will benefit from it. I can't judge that. I don't think that he can gain points using this narrative unless you have a serious backup. And as far as I know, Arestovich doesn't have this serious backup. To convert this media popularity into political popularity, it's impossible, because there should be a structure, there should be consistent work. But in Ukraine, when it's at war and elites are not interested in a stranger coming in power, they took him for parvenu last year, and elites take him as parvenu too. And if the elites decide that he's a threat, I think that his days are counted, I mean, as a politician. But does he pose threat or not, I don't know. Now, Arkady, actually, I saw your post in Facebook, and I enjoyed reading it, that he is making an attempt to find mutual understanding with the Russian opposition. Yes, and it's true. And actually, he's more mature in that than many of the Russian immigrants. Will he gain any points? I don't think so. Nothing. Besides, he may have additional enemies in Ukraine, and I know that very well, and he already has them. The fact is that he says things that nobody else does. He's courageous saying this, but I really don't see any political prospect behind those words. But things may change because we don't know everything. So far, the idea of converting this media popularity into political influence, I think it's overestimated. And I think what we saw, what happened in different countries with different elections, so that actually this experience shows us that. So Abbas is an expert in elections, and in fact, when he draws attention like this, I mean Arestovich and his political opponents, when they influence like that, and for a politician who is looking ahead and not on, around this cycle, electoral cycle, he kind of gains more disadvantages than advantages, but we can make an assumption that he is acting in congruence with Zelensky, and when he makes such statements, he looks ahead. It's almost like with Netanyahu. Yes, today Zelensky is a symbol of resistance, it's a hope. But what's going to be ahead of it? In the future, maybe people will be disappointed and Zelensky leaves. And then many things that sound unusual today, they may work. Abbas, to some degree you're aware of these statements. Well, before we speak about Arestovich's prospects, let's speak about Zelensky's prospects, their main things. He's a leader of the fighting nations, he's a leader of resistance. If people don't get disappointed with him, then nobody will have chances, including Arestovich. First, people will determine their attitude to Zelensky, and if they decide that Zelensky is good for them, they will not consider any alternatives, including Arestovich. Others will have their chances, including Arestovich, if first people decide that for some reason Zelensky is not good for them anymore, then they're looking for alternatives. So Zelensky has advantage. I really don't sense Ukrainian dynamics well, and I wouldn't say that I understand prospects of Zelensky, and I completely don't understand prospects of Arestovich, but I can see that Arestovich is extremely smart and talented and gifted. And his main issue is not his relationship with elites. Zelensky actually won the election without having strong support of the elites. And the protest is good because you can win elections without the elites. And in our time, media popularity can be converted in political capital, but it doesn't happen automatically. He will have to work on the ground, so to speak. But if your image is in demand, there will be people who will help you with this. Arestovich is a very good communicator. He'll find sponsors if he wants to. He found common language with the majority of the Russian opposition at the point when all other Ukrainians were damning all Russians and so-called good Russians, and Arestovich demonstrates very good communicating talents. I mean, publicly and behind the closed doors too. But the main issue of Arestovich is not the lack of context among elites, and I say that he'll find the proper context if he needs to. But his efficiency as a media communicator, he's so efficient that such type of people, they call them too good to be true. He provokes reservations. He kind of speaks too well. Remember, like in Master and Margaret novel, when this guy Rimsky is sitting in his office in the night after Voland's performance, and he's sitting there, and Varenucha comes there and tells him about all the stories that happened to him. And first Rimsky believes these stories, but it's very well described there. So when you read this novel, but at some point there is a turn. The more colored the stories of Stepan were, when Varenucha was describing all these stories, all these adventures of Stepa and those drunkard dances and stuff, the more colored those stories were, the less Rimsky believed those stories. And when Varenucha finished talking, Rimsky knew that there was no word of truth in this story. Tony Blair actually encountered this problem. He was a great communicator in 1997, and he literally tore apart conservatives, and he brought back the fame of Labour Party, and there were many years that Labour Party could not get in power. And Tony Blair did that in 1997, but his main issue was that he was way too smooth, way too good, and people grew suspicious. And people had that thing, we believe everybody, but we can't quite believe you. And I think Arestovich has a similar issue in this part. I would like to apologize because we agreed to have just 1 hour and I really have to go in 2 minutes. Yes, right. I actually wanted to finish our talk, and I would like to thank you for this conversation. And approximately once in 3 weeks we managed to get together like this and please you like that. And I'll try to do my best to invite Valeriy and Abbas to our channel. I really liked today's talk, and I hope that our audience liked it too, and you will like it. Valeriy and Abbas, thank you very much. Peace to Israel, peace to Ukraine, peace to Russia. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.